Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It is Andrew Hughes, and I'm here with Susan Manos today. And we're going to be talking about a very cool project that we got to collaborate on for quality assurance. But before I do, first want to give a shout out to everybody that has joined us in the live chat. If you are here today, just tell us where you're from and who you are and what you do. And in the meantime, what I'm going to do is introduce Susan and have her kind of talk a little bit about herself and her experience at Procter and Gamble. And then we'll turn it back to me, and then we'll start talking about the project. And then first and foremost, everybody check out TLD Cast on Twitter. There's the # TLD Cast to check that out. And if you could, let us know where you're from. I'm Andrew Hughes from Designing Digitally in Franklin, Ohio. And my primary job is to be the Chief Executive Officer. Which I don't know really what that means other than to take out the trash and fix the internet. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to somebody that is way cooler than me, Susan. And Susan, introduce yourself, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Manos. As Andrew mentioned, I am in corporate quality assurance for Procter and Gamble. I'm the Global Learning and Development Manager for QA. I don't know how that's cooler or more interesting than the stuff that Andrew does with Designing Digitally, because, we're all about the compliance training. But, Procter's been around a really long time. We have a lot of different products in a lot of different countries. And so making sure all of that is made safe for our consumers is our primary goal, particularly with learning and development in that space. So I'm happy to be here.
Very cool. And with inside of Procter and Gamble, how long have you been there? What is your
Okay.
role outside of that? What have you? Where'd you come from? Because I know this story, but not very many people do. So where did you
Sure.
come
I
from?
I have been with P&G for 25 years, but I, like many people from Procter and Gamble, came in through acquisition. I was with the Imes company, which was a local pet food company here in the Ohio, prior to Imes being sold to Procter and Gamble in the late 90s. Luckily, I was able to keep all of my seniority, and it really opened the world up to life beyond pet food. But we loved pet food, and that Andrew and I have a common connection there. Andrew's dad actually worked for Imes a little bit further up the road, north of us here, up at the Lipstick plant. But we had a common connection right off the bat. So been here 25 years, been doing the L&D stuff, I don't know, 8 or 9 now. Accidental instructional designer like most of us are in some capacity or another. But have really been loving it, and just did my CPLP credentialing last year. So I'm
Yay!
staying in the space. Whether you guys want me or not, I'm staying.
Yay! That is a very long time. I commend you. And I state that because you see in today's society, people, I've heard this rule of the 1-3-5 rule with postgraduates. At least we talk about it at the university side. And now the trend is the first job is usually 1 year, and then the second job is usually 3, and then the third is 5, before they look at something even more long term. And I state that because as a business owner, I would love to have the loyalty of 25 years. So Procter and Gamble is A, lucky to have you, and B, you are a very devoted person to this department that you've joined into about 8 or 9 years ago. And in my opinion, you've been a huge asset to them. I've seen your work outside of the stuff that you've done with us. And I know how much you have to fight the other departments to provide the value of training. And you do an excellent job of that. So in my opinion, that prior history of Mars, I think, has brought you to where you are today. And yes, for all of you that she did make the comment, My father was a maintenance worker at the Iams dog food factory. So I state that my dad was a factory worker, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and that's it. And Susan and my dad happened to cross paths in working and never even knew it. And then fast forward years later, we end up partnering on projects. So small world and pretty cool stories.
The connection was pretty incredible, I think, considering how you and I met, and then to have that common connection was pretty interesting. I think one of the interesting things about Procter and Gamble, though, the reason it's easy to be here for 25 years is that Procter and Gamble's the career, and then you have different work assignments. So you don't necessarily have to sit in the same chair doing the same job for 25 years. There's a lot of opportunity to work on different types of consumer good products, to work in different areas of the country and the like. So I think that helps keep it interesting, so that you're constantly challenged and doing some different things. So I think that's one of the unique things about P&G that's been it's been a real benefit to have that as part of my career.
You know, Procter and Gamble is very well known for that, and I'm not sure if you can elaborate much, but I got to experience in my younger days the General Electric, the GE, because I worked at the turbine engine plant down here. The onboarding and the experience they have with people with onboarding is that the first year you come in and you do every other month you are changing jobs to kind of learn about what is happening and what you could possibly take. And then from there, you only for the first 5 years get to choose one position and run it for a year and see what you really enjoy to do. And then after that fifth year, you really get to jump into what you would like to be at GE. And it's very interesting approach because they have a very high retention rate because they've allowed for that exploratory experience for people, especially early on in their work life, which I find to be fascinating. I believe you guys have put some of that stuff in place yourselves, but I don't know how much you can elaborate on any of that.
Yeah, I think the P&G onboarding experience is just slightly differently. We definitely recruit in for a single job, so you wouldn't see someone rotating around for the first year or so. But early in your career, call it entry level to like 7 or 8 years with the company, they really try to give you a chance to build not just a depth of like a technical mastery, but also breadth. So what are all the things you think you might be interested in learning about that we can give you those experiences in? And then, when you're more senior in your career, then they take advantage of all of that technical expertise that you've developed through the early part of your career. So it's a little bit different. They do encourage people to think creatively about their careers. What else may you be interested in where we can leverage what you've already learned in a newer capacity? There's a lot of value for that fresh look. I'm sure whoever comes in behind me in this position will be encouraged to see where are the opportunities. Where did we not go in the first part of the L&D experience for QA? And someone with a fresh mind is going to see the things that I just don't anymore because I've been doing this for a while. So I think it's a little bit different than what GE does. But I think the end result is the same. You want a well-rounded employee
Yeah.
that really understands the business that they're working in and has the technical expertise to kind of move things forward for the business in a big way.
And one of the things that I'm sure you've seen in even your career is there are times where it's beneficial to move someone up. However, what I see all the time is they'll take the high performer at that position and try and move them up into the management position, rather than looking at if this individual or you had somebody that was a lower performer at that position, and move them up because of the different skill sets that they may have. And what I find is companies are always weighing the options of, do we take that person and move them up out of that high performing position when they're a key performer for the knowledge exchange, or do we keep them there for the performance that we're seeing today? And so do you guys see a lot of that struggle at P&G?
And I can't speak for all of P&G. I will tell you in
Yeah,
quality
yeah, of course
assurance,
not.
my opinion is, it's always a balance when you're looking at talent management. So you need people that are good We refer to them in P&G as managers of others. So those that
Yep.
actually have direct reporting responsibility versus those that are, more individually contributing to the business. So I think you're always trying to find that right mix of you've got some technical expertise or you've got more of that managerial bent that makes you a really good people manager and a really great coach. With a big focus on development. So I'd say we try to keep ourselves about half and half. Sometimes we do that better than others, but I think that it's a constant struggle to think about talent management across the whole spectrum versus just focusing in on one area and then, kind of giving yourself a bit of a liability where you're not looking so strongly at it. So trying to maintain that balance has been pretty critical for us.
You're not the only one to state that, and I know you. Obviously, you're not representing all of PNG. You guys are huge, and if that were the case, you would be driving a way cooler car.
That's very true. That is very true.
So we don't think that at all. And not only that, but there's the talent division, the L&D department, and obviously a ton of different departments on that. I was just curious because my next segue was going to be before we actually dive into and divulge into the deep into the project is, looking at those challenges. What have you seen over the 8 or 9 years in training, even in the quality assurance side, and how has training evolved since you first got in there?
Yeah, and I think we struggle with the same thing everybody else does. How do we stop being the order taker and really start being kind of a performance management consultant? And continuing to ask the question, how is this going to help our business? What does success look like? Versus, Susan, we need to create this training. It's going to solve all the world's problems, because we know that that's not true. And I would say, particularly with this project, we pushed the conservative envelope in P&G with this project. I mean, no one knew really what we were doing when we started, and it was the first time anybody within the company had tried to do this. And I think that my advice in this space is when you're trying to do something new, um, not maybe new to the industry, but new to your organization, move very quickly from it can't be done to how would we do it. And
Yes.
then, drag people along with you kicking and screaming. At some point, they're going to give
Yes.
up or run away or whatever the case may be, but you have to constantly say, here's what has to be true for us to do this, and then start moving that direction. You may find that today's not the day to get that done, or you may just convince someone that you have all the answers and they'll start letting you try things. That's definitely been the case with this project. I remember there were a couple of times where it was like, oh, we're never going to get this thing done. But you have to be willing to be the first person and ask those questions that no one seems to know the answers to relentlessly until they're willing to start helping you research solutions.
Susan, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. If you keep this up, they're going to make statues of you.
I know it comes across as slightly combative. It's really not.
No,
You
it's
just have to
not.
be persistent.
It's not, and I state this because there are a lot of times. Many of you know me; I'm an open book. But one of the things that I'm very passionate about is this whole training and knowledge exchange needs to be an integrated part of the organization, not this afterthought or this oh crap, we need this now. We have this argument all the time. There's training that I got to check it off for insurance purposes, and then there's training for actual performance. And so, yes, we're going to have to do the training, the check off, the compliance stuff. I understand that. But performance, if you have knowledgeable and performing employees, your business will thrive. And I don't care how big or small. And if you can exchange knowledge between the employees, both horizontally and vertically, you will find that your organization will just explode from this knowledge exchange and awareness. And each year at our company, we do a key word that we want to work on to improve the organization. And this year is enlightenment. And so everything that we do is to enlighten each other of what's happening with inside of the organization, outside of the organization, and that goes for how we're feeling, how we're working, what's not. And so enlightenment is our key word for that, because if you can do knowledge exchange and you can do performance training effectively, that's where the time, the money, and the investment is applicable, and it makes sense. But if we're trying to just check it off for insurance purposes, there's no reason we have to go any higher than the remembering of Bloom's taxonomy, and they're not really going to need to perform it.
Well, and as you can imagine, being in a QA organization, that's the default, right? Is to check that box.
Oh
And there
yeah.
are definitely some things, even from a quality assurance perspective, around the globe. There are just some things you have to do to be compliant, to keep people out of jail and keep your consumers safe. But beyond that, we want to make it meaningful. And so it's how do we marry those two things up? So how do we make sure we're not making people sit at their laptop clicking next for an hour a week just to check the box, but we actually make it a valuable experience for people. And I think that's also kind of a constant challenge that we're trying to work through on a daily basis.
You're not the only organization nor the only person that has to deal with that on a daily basis. A lot of times I find that L&D is reactionary. We are trying to, oh crap, fix this situation. And a lot of that comes from the fact that uh, our division of the organization normally isn't the primary driver of the income for the organization.
Very true.
Yet we're the ones that have to bandage everything up.
Hmm.
And so, and then on the other side of that, we're just now getting to the point where we are starting to be responsible for the data of our own performance with things like XAPI and different types of API portals outside of what we're just seeing them pass or complete it. And what I'm finding is there's two reactions to this: pure panic in the L&D side, and a full open-armed adoption, and let's roll. And so it's fascinating to see both. And in my opinion, I think both are needed. We should have panic because the panic should, in my opinion, embark on allowing you to continue to explore and implement and test ways to get more analytical data. And then the early adopters, they're the ones that are going to be the nerds that end up showing everybody else how to do it. And that's what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Now, the hard part is a large organization like you guys implementing analytical data is not just a, hey, John in IT, can you install this for me?
Right.
So tell me a little bit about, I'm sure you guys have talked about XAPI, things like that. Tell me, how far have those conversations gone? Because it's all across the board with large organizations right now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, because the organization is so large, a lot of that I don't have visibility to.
Yeah.
So like our global learning and development community kind of owns our learning management system as an enterprise level solution. So from a QA perspective, that's the corporate system of record. So that's what we're using. It takes away a lot of the burden of making sure it's validated and all those things that our regulatory agencies like for us to have from a QA perspective. But it also means we don't really get to have a ton of influence in like what are we going to do with everything that's possible with XAPI. And I agree, Neil, it is revolutionary and it scares the devil out of conservative companies like P&G that
Uh-huh.
may not necessarily understand it. So I'm not even aware yet, Andrew, what capability we have for that. But I think as we continue to move forward, it's such a frantic pace, with the whole digital era of things that we're going to have to get there. But again, they're trying to find a solution for 90,000 employees. And so what QA wants, and we're only like
Hmm.
3,000, it may not be the priority for the organization. So I'm not clear on just exactly what they're doing in that space. We have not done anything to research a solution specifically for QA either. We've just had different priorities right now. And XAPI is like Greek to me. I could do a lot to learn more about it myself. It just makes my eye twitch at this point. I'm sure it would be helpful if I understood it, but I'm just not there yet.
Oh, it not a problem. The organizations are, we're fighting the same thing we were fighting with badging, and this is Andrew. Oh, here we go. Thoughts with Andrew. All right, so here's my thoughts. Okay, so 5 years ago, badging started to really hit hard. There are many third-party badging companies out there that do a pretty good job with your APIs. However, many of the LMS companies, especially the large enterprise ones, what we may not understand is that those systems are actually ERPs. They're not necessarily just learning management systems. It's not just for our L&D factors. They're not using it just for that. There's a whole other factors that the ERP does, and it's all tied into one systems. So what ends up happening is those ERPs and those systems say, wait a second, we can allow for these API implementations, or we could keep this very secure because we have contracts with companies like P&G that we are responsible for the data. Why don't we just build the badging system and tell them, nah, you're not going to get that yet as a feature, or not allow that, so that we can build our own, so we can keep it internal to the systems that we have, which stops any other security leaks. That's what we saw with badging. If you notice, many of the LMSs have badging now. You're going to see that more and more with XAPI, and it'll be built into the LRS, will be built into all of the LMSs. So will that get rid of third-party systems? Absolutely not. There are absolute needs for the third-party systems, but I think the larger organizations like Cornerstone, Saba, SuccessFactors, SumTotal, those are implementing their own systems for those reasons, and I
Okay.
think you're going to see that across the board.
Yeah, I'll be glad when we get there, but I don't know that we're going to get there anytime soon.
Yeah, it's revolutionary, but I don't think unless you are really going to divulge into it. And I think if you look around, there's organizations like Megan Torrance is doing an excellent job. Andrew on Twitter is doing an excellent job. Aaron and the ADL guys are doing an excellent job. But what we're finding is the technical side. Somebody in your role would probably need to know overall how and what to track and how we can actually track that, which is action based. But the concern that I have about it is, I think we're going to end up just like in Google Analytics. We're going to end up in data overload, and then we're going to go, I don't even know what I'm looking at. Which,
Yeah.
how many of you guys has end up in that? And it usually swings so far for us in society that once we have access to something, it's like somebody turns on a fire hose.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so let's ask you this, Susan. If you had a perfect world to track what you want to track, what would you track?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know. What am I want? I think I'd have to start with, what do I need to do with the data, right? What's it going to tell me, or what we hmm, huh.
See?
I would be curious. Now, I don't know how much value there would be, but I would be curious to see like the amount of time people take. So, we're a
Yeah.
multinational corporation. We've got manufacturing plants in like 27 countries. So I always worry about, everything we do is in English for the most
Hmm.
part. We have some things that aren't. How much longer does it take, an English as a second language learner to go through our content versus someone with English as their primary language? Those kinds of things I would like to know. I guess I don't need XAPI to do that. I could do a couple of studies and get there. But those are the types of questions I always go, well, how could we make this better? Because again, mandatory compliance training here. So how do we make that less painful for people? And that to me is one of the ways that we could kind of significantly impact our ESL community within the company. So that would be one. How long it takes them, what's that look like versus English? How often are they going into the LMS and looking for something? We're trying to sort out how to
Yeah.
make things more accessible to people. It's one of our priorities this year. so that people don't have to go into the LMS to look for something they did 6 months ago to find the slide. So we're working on that pretty diligently this year, and it's like, okay, uh, how do we move the needle in that space just to give people what they need in the flow of work? So it'd be those types of things, getting our quizzes and tests out of the content development software, and finding a better
Yeah.
way to do that so we can look at the analytics, what questions are well written, which ones aren't. Is there something that just everybody is missing? So I think those are kind of the basic things. If you gave me an hour, I could probably sit down and give you a laundry list, but those are the couple that come to the top of mind.
That's actually fantastic. And you brought up some interesting facts. How many times they're logging into the LMS? I think
Right.
that's quite interesting because that will tell you accessing the learning across the board within the organization and how much they're using for that for knowledge transfer. And we usually run data on that, but not we'd never requested from like the large organizations of how many of the
Hmm.
users logged in or relogged in. And that's a fascinating thought. If I were going to piggyback on this, one of the things, because being a professor myself, I would want to know, and this is something that we know here as the organization is, how many clicks, how much activity with the mouse has
Hmm.
taken place. And I'm
Right.
not saying that I want to know like John clicked this, John clicked this, John clicked this. I'm saying we were actually building a system and we've implemented for a couple of customers where it told us how active they were on the existing screen, and it would rate that and allow us to know at the end, and we'd be able to send that rating. That way we could know if they're actually interacting with it or not.
Right. Yep.
And this was out without just the XAPI statements of they click this, they click this, because the first one was checking for if this is the active screen, and then checking for any keystrokes or any mouse movements, things like that that were on the active screen, and how often that was happening compared to when we recorded it during the actual alpha and beta testing. So tell us
Gotcha.
if they were just clicking, trying to leave it as an active window, and then coming back to it.
They're
um,
multitasking. That's one of the data points you get, right? How much
all the time.
multitasking can we assume that they're doing? Exactly. Yep.
Oh, let's be real. All of us are doing it right now. Let's be real. We are all reading the chats. We're all looking at Twitter. Somebody's probably mocking me for either drinking a monster or for my nasally talk or something.
Yeah,
So,
Kara's already called you out for your energy drink.
thank you, Kara. Well, she knows. She knows. They take my blood, they're gonna find it's half energy drink as it is. um, so looking at, let's talk a little bit about this, and then we'll jump into the project. Okay.
Okay.
So, would you like to? Because first off, you got to work with our team. So I would like to know a little bit about how we met, and I'll jump in with you, and how this came about, and yeah.
So and there's a little bit of back history, so I'll try to make it quick. Within quality assurance at Procter and Gamble, we changed the way we were thinking about quality assurance. Just trying to make it easier to consume, I would say. And once we did that, the first question we got was, okay, so now how do I get qualified in this effort? And so we kept trying to tell people, well, the principles are all the same, which they were, but we kind of threw everything out and started from scratch. And so everybody was a little panicked. Change is that way for a lot of us. And so one of the things we decided to do was, okay, we need to find a way to qualify people. And what we do is what I'm going to call a self-assessment. So for any of our programs around the world, we need to be able to assess how we manage quality in that particular organization within P&G. And we train people as to how to do these assessments. And so this was part of what we were trying to do. We had some formal web-based training that was out there. We have a group of corporate assessors that do this for a living. That's their 9-to-5 job, so we could rely on them. But we didn't really have a good space for people to practice. And that was kind of where the simulation idea came about. And then it was the search for someone to help us do that. Luckily, proximity was a big help in this case. Andrew's right down the interstate from me. And so we started talking to Designing Digitally about, we really don't know how to do this. Not sure we want to know how to do this. So what can you tell us about this project? And that was kind of how it started in a nutshell. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Andrew.
Yeah, you know, what ended up happening before I met Susan is Procter and Gamble was looking to do a vendor selection, and so they ended up putting out a RFP for vendor selections to be on their vendor list. And this was probably about 4 years prior to meeting Susan.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is we went through this very long vetting process. P&G did an excellent job. I mean, they visited our facilities, they looked through our books, they called every one of our clients. I mean, outside of just saying, we'll just go ahead and take you guys, they did a very, very thorough job. Them and the FBI Office of Personnel Management are right on the same level when they
Now
inspect
that's
you.
an exaggeration.
Okay, well, all right. So the Office of Personnel Management is a little more thorough, but not much more thorough. You guys do an excellent job, and I don't blame you. As a big organization, you need to make sure that you have organizations that are representing you guys in the best fashion. So I'm only teasing. They did a great job, and by all means, they did look at our books and call every one of our references and all of that as any buyer should, in my opinion. So from there, what ended up happening is that IDDS system, Susan actually put in a bid, and I do believe if I look back, the bid did say this is not a traditional learning experience.
Right. Yep.
Please understand that we are not expecting this to look like anything else we've done before. And when I saw that, I said, that's designing digitally. That is exactly what we do, because just like Susan was talking about, a lot of times we come in and we are the ones that are inducing panic because we're going, no, 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 we're going to just do something you haven't done before at all, and we're going to take it a different way. And they'll go, what? No. And we'd say, just trust us. We've done this many of times. Just trust us, and we will collaborate with you throughout the entire process, so you'll know everything that's going on, because it is very important for us as an organization to ensure that your project is a success, because that is a direct representation of us, but also more importantly to us, it's a representation of you. And so we want to make sure that it's something that not just you're extremely impressed with, but your boss's boss gives you a pat on the back. And so that is what we really strive for here. And so when you put that out, I went, this is it. This is exactly what we're doing. And you're right. Procter and Gamble is known for that knowledge transfer, but a lot of it is working with engineers and scientists and people that are
Mm-hmm.
that are very much into, give me a printed manual, or give me just a reference guide. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you can have knowledge transfer that way. Lean, mean, lower end of the blooms, you can still do knowledge transfer. We all read blog articles and learn things every day. So it was this approach of, let's take it to a completely different performance level than we've never done before, but we got to make it online. But there's a twist. This is for blended learning. So I will get into that, and we'll talk a little bit about the challenges and the approaches that we've taken. But before I do this, what I want to know is, did I butcher the post that you put? Because it was like 4 or 5 years ago now. So
It's been a minute since we started together. No, I think it's accurate, and I think we were very realistic in that we knew we wanted to do something that was different, particularly within the confines of the company and how conservative we are as an organization. But we wanted to make sure, and we talked about it as a safe place for people to practice. So how do I ask questions and then how do I respond to the answers I get? If somebody's like, oh, you don't need to worry about that, do you just say, okay, thanks? Or do you probe a little bit more? And so we wanted to give our audience here an opportunity to be able to do that. And we knew we had to do that through more than just a click next web-based training or an e-learning. And e-learning definitely has its place in that space, but we knew we wanted to go beyond that. And we were smart enough to recognize we didn't have the capability, nor did we want to take the time and go to the expense to build the capability, which is what led us to searching for a vendor that could help us do that. Um, and so I think, it took us a while for P&G and designing digitally to find a common language, because a lot of times it felt like we were talking entirely different in entirely different dialects there for a while. But once we got
Yeah.
there, it was all good.
Yeah, especially one of the things that we really love to do is be the bridge between somebody like Susan that knows, and even your subject matter experts that know this material inside and out, and someone that's walking into your classroom or logging into your LMS for the first time. And then on the other side, we have these inner conversations that we have our partners join, and they'll be talking nerdy technical things while you're right there, either in the room or on the phone, and you're going, what are they stating? What? And it's usually a programmer, an instructional designer, or graphics people, arguing about how they're going to make this work. And then they'll come back and say, but in the process for you guys, do they do this? And you're like, yes, but they don't do it this way. And then they kind of run through all of that, because what we're trying to do is either mimic what happens in that job throughout the process and anticipate those thoughts and anticipate prior experiences and blend those into something that allows them to have something very dynamic and not something just linear that they take once and done, but at the same time also something that is manageable and doesn't become Call of Duty like budget, because we're not trying to do
Yeah.
that either. We're in the
Yeah,
L&D
the
department.
Call of Duty budget would have not have been helpful for us. And I think too, and we just had a call about another project we just started with you guys earlier this morning. And
Yeah.
between us, I would say learning and development here in QA, and your team as well, particularly your instructional designer, project manager, with our subject matter experts, we're constantly going, so in real life, how does this show up? Is it we're looking at a piece of equipment, or are they looking at a schematic or a drawing, because that's what we want to mimic in whatever simulated environment. It's not meant to be completely like real life. Clearly, it's a simulation where they can practice, but it needs to be relevant and believable. And so I think, you kind of work that line between a little bit of creative license in order to show something in a more exaggerated fashion or not, but making sure we can bring it back to what they're going to be doing on the job is pretty critical.
And that's where we find at Designing Digitally is our bread and butter. And the reason why is that many people can take that information and digest it and implement it in a way that provides them a structural flow to read it or to read it and do an assessment with it. But what we're aiming to do is to get them that step above that to an actual experiential situation. And the reason why is you really don't learn until you experience it. And it comes back to what I said for many years. We've all have been teenagers, and mom and dad said, don't do that because this is going to happen. And then you did it and you ended up in trouble. We all did. Don't act like you didn't. Some of you are over here like, yeah.
Only if you get caught.
Mm, mm.
Only if you
See,
get caught.
this is why Susan and I will be friends for the rest of our lives.
But I think one of the best parts about the simulation is that it's part of a broader program. So, we have a formal learning piece where there are definitely some principles of how to do this and what the execution should be like. And then, the simulation is the place to practice. But I think the part of this that adds the most value is we have a mentoring component. And that mentoring component gives the person a real live person to talk through what's happening and how to relate that back to what's happening at their work location. And it looks like Andrew pulled up the video of some of the simulation screenshots. So we talked through setting up the agenda, There are 6 different interaction types in the simulation, and so this is one where we're actually doing a one-on-one conversation. And the person picks how they're going to respond. Are they going to say, okay, thanks? Or are they going to ask the more probing question? In order to save seat time, this interaction was really helpful because we were able to say, this happened and here are your notes.
Yeah.
And so we give you a chance to prioritize what you want to do with those notes later. Do I need to follow up on something here, or this just background information? So all of the work to create this is Andrew's team did an incredible job of kind of taking some reference photos and then creating our simulated environment, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, here were some challenges for everyone to know about this project. Number one, obviously myself and Susan are very familiar with some of the manufacturing facilities at P&G, but for security reasons, we don't want to mimic the floor plan of one of the actual manufacturing facilities for Procter and Gamble. So what we ended up doing is taking reference pieces and building what I would consider to be another ideal P&G plant with things relatively in the same location, but not exact, so that we didn't have any security concerns. And then, go ahead, Susan, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and clearly everybody recognizes the value of it being realistic up to a point, right? So, you wouldn't put your utilities like in the back 40 because that's not realistic. But again, we tried to design it so that the utilities didn't look exactly like what we had within some of our manufacturing plants.
Yeah, and on top of that, the cool thing about she's talking about with your notes, rather this isn't a situation where you talk to somebody, it's a multiple choice and you're done. What happens is you make your notes and build your notes out, and depending on the notes and the data that you collect in your notes, bases on how effective you're doing, you're also able to take pictures of particular things throughout the entire experience, which you don't see on this video. And I'm sorry if I gave that away. But you're actually able to take a digital photo of anything, and it takes a digital snapshot of what you're seeing in your digital camera. And the reason why is part of the quality assurance is to actually do that. So there are many different features. And when you guys see one of these highlight videos from our company, what you're seeing is just the small scratch of the surface, because A, we don't want to give our customers content material away. B, we're doing things that are much more complex than what you're just seeing in this drag and drop here. And then C, this is Susan's baby. So if Susan wants to rock it and show it all, then Susan can. But this is not my baby. But we do these videos to give Susan some ammo to actually work with, to be able to promote, show off, and even say, hey, look, boss, this is an overview of some of what has been done.
Yeah, and so the simulation is part of our qualification program for this assessment to be able to conduct these assessments. As part of the program, in order to be qualified officially and formally with all the powers that be, they have to be able to write good observations. So I saw this thing on the line is not real helpful, but if you can get really clear on why that was an important observation to make and what some potential action to take for that is, that's going to be a better observation. So they had to be able to write good observations. They had to be savvy enough to pick up on some of the observations. So some of the things that we built into this were real evident. It's very in your face. If you missed it, you just weren't looking at all. And then for some of those things, you'd have to be a more savvy assessor to be able to find them. You'd have to dig down a couple of layers to get there. And so part of the mentoring relationship is to recognize that and talk through the observations they did make versus not make. So someone could go through this, and if they didn't pick up on the very obvious observations that we baked into it, we would know that they weren't quite ready yet to be qualified to lead these assessments in their site. And so I think that's part of what's been important about the mentoring relationship. The simulation is great practice, but if it's done outside of the context of that entire program, it doesn't have the same value. So I guess if I was going to kind of give some advice to the community, it's baking that in and saying, okay, this is going to add value to the whole program. It's not the program. because that's definitely, if we ask people, when we survey people about the program, when we ask them what was most valuable, while they enjoy the simulation and they think it's great, they always tell us the mentoring was the most valuable part of the program.
Yep. Susan, you actually, I was going to make a point, and you nailed it. So now I'm like,
Good.
oh, blah, 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 blah. So here's what I was going to say to piggyback on Susan's side of things. This actually is a blended learning simulated experience that went inside of their learning management system,
Mhm.
SCORM coded. And their blended learning experience to take this simulation is 8 hours. And so there's a challenge there. So we have their team is in the classroom, interacting, having the mentor, doing the simulation, coming back to the simulation, working in the classroom, back and forth. And I know I'm butchering it, Susan. So you can step all over me whenever you want. Okay. But where I'm going with this is this isn't something they sat down for 20 minutes and did, and they were done. No, 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 no. This is much bigger and much larger than that. And I'll let Susan accurately describe it.
Yeah, so I think when we worked with Andrew's team, we were kind of targeting no more than a 2-hour seat time. So, and I can testify from alpha and beta testing this monster as we were finalizing the development of it. It could take you about 2 hours to just click through, right? So you're hitting all of the high points in each of the interactions. You're in the, like, on the one-on-one conversations, there are several different scenarios there. So you click through each of those, that'll take you about 2 hours. Well, this is a virtual program, so there is no classroom training. So even the meeting with their mentor, someone in India may have a mentor that's in China, for lots of different reasons. So they meet and do video meetings over WebEx. So they spend a lot of time on their own. But what you'll find is these people know that they're qualifying. This is a formal qualification for them. So while in our minds, L&D, 2-hour seat time, that is way too much anyway. You know, we have people that have told us on the back end of it, they took anywhere from 2 hours to 12 hours. It just depended on the learner. But Andrew's right, the average is 8 to 10. And it's because they're going through the simulation more than once to
Yep.
ensure that they've found all of the observations that they want to find. And then they may go through it again when they have to write up their report, when they have to record all their observations more formally. So they could be in and out of the simulation activity through the LMS 3 or 4 times before they feel like they've gotten everything they needed to out of it. One of the things that's not like real life, in real life, this assessment would occur over a period of months. We have an annual cycle for the assessment, and they can choose to do the whole assessment in 1 month, or they can divide the assessment up so it's more manageable with all of their daily work over the course of the year. But very rarely would someone assess their entire site on all of these activities within a day or even
Yeah.
a week. That's not part of the real life of this scenario. So it's a little bit different for them. And I think they're hypersensitive to, did I find everything? At least that's kind of the feedback that we've gotten as we've talked to them.
You know what I want to say? Quality assurance. Those people.
I know, so detailed, very, very detailed.
Speaking of that, I apologize. I didn't mean classroom setting. I meant like the sit downs with the mentors, which is still
Yeah.
virtual. So my apologies. Now,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit before this blended learning experience. What were you guys doing before this?
We had not been doing anything for a while. There was a previous course in a previous life that had been a few years behind us before we talked to designing digitally, and it was classroom. And so
Yeah.
it was like 3 days of lecture and then like a day and a half of an environment that wasn't quite so slick as what we got with the designing digitally simulation. And then they went back home, they went back to their work site, and they were expected to develop a similar report and return it to the facilitators of the training for their review. Obviously, from a resourcing standpoint, you need facilitators around the globe that are qualified to train the material. You have to pay everybody to travel to a central location to bring them in.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things really contribute to the resource strain that, a 5-day instructor-led training does. And we were doing it, I think, in every region. And we have 4 regions the way we're divided up in P&G. So 4 regions, we did it every quarter in each region. So somebody else can do the math. We would do 30 or 40 people, whether they were the assessors or not, that was happening. And somebody went, we're not really getting the same bang for the buck that we were when we started this. So we discontinued it, and we didn't have anything. There was a void there for a bit before we provided this.
And I know in our initial discussions, which you and I are both big components of this, I'm a firm believer in the 70-20-10 rule. And I know that your approach to this was with that in mind. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your thoughts were? And you said this before, but reiterating to everyone, this wasn't the end-all solution, everyone, and it shouldn't be. There should be a cornucopia of different content material for training for a competency, and not necessarily just a course. So I'll let you talk about that.
So, and we tend to think, corporate QA L&D, we tend to think of mastery in terms of basic, intermediate, advanced, just as a simple calibration for everyone. And this program was meant to be, call it an intermediate level of mastery. That's what we were trying to build here. So people already had to have the foundation. They had to understand what the quality systems at P&G were and what the value in that was and all the things those encompass. But when we got to this activity, we wanted to make sure we were calibrating everyone, to the same starting point. And so for the assessment, there are actually 3 prerequisite web-based trainings that they need to do. They can do them anytime. They're on the LMS. They're available in the catalog for anybody to do. One is how to write good assessments, good observations. So they had to know how to do that. We didn't have a knowledge check or anything else in there. It was just straight content. Click next. That one takes about 15 or 20 minutes to do. Another one was on the assessment program itself, like who's involved and who leads it and who makes decisions when people disagree. That it's an annual process, and here's how you can schedule it, and here's the tool that we use to track everything. And so that also available, no knowledge check or test, just 30 minutes to do that. And then finally, there's it's an Excel sheet on steroids that everyone uses, a workbook that everyone uses to document their observations and what they're doing with it. And so we had another training on how to use that tool. It's bad if you need to have a training to use the tool in Excel, but there you go. So we wanted to make sure they were set up to do that. All that has to happen before we even register for them to program. We marry them up with a mentor. And so we look at what region of the world is the person in, what type of products does their manufacturing location make, how long have they been with quality assurance, how long have they been in their current location, all of those things. And then we try to marry them up with a complementary mentor, someone that understands their product, that how that product is made and the like. In a similar region, you wouldn't pair somebody from Asia with somebody in North America because that's just awful for both people. 2 a.m. phone calls aren't real great. So then we marry them together and they have an initial discussion where the mentor kind of talks them through, you know, what's their background? Do they have the necessary foundational understanding to be successful with this program? And then the mentor kind of sets them up for the simulation and says, here's how to navigate within it. Here are the things to look for. Here are the things you won't find. Because again, QA people, very detailed. They'd stay in this thing for 30 hours if we didn't tell them, look, you're not going to find this type of thing in there, so don't bother to look for it. And then the mentor sends them away and says, let me know if you have questions, or we can touch base in a couple of weeks. But we just kind of give them free rein to interact in the simulation when they want to and how they want to. So it's wide open. They can sit down and do the whole thing at one time. Or what most people do is they've got an hour today, so they're going to work through what they can in an hour. So they take the time they need to do that. They record all of their observations in the crazy Excel workbook. They write an executive summary. They send that off to their mentor for their review. And then they schedule what we call the qualification discussion. So the mentor reviews everything that they've found, and then when they have that qualification discussion, they talk not only about the observations they made in the simulation, but also what does that look like in real life at that person's location, right? So like I mentioned before, that person may have a different product that they manufacture in their plant, but the mentor's job is to help them make the connection from A to B to say, we saw this in the simulation. Now let's talk about how this might show up in your location. So it's labor intensive, but the value has been pretty incredible so far. We give people 60 days because again, they work for a living. This is just a qualification program. So they have 60 days to complete the whole program. I would say people take 15 to 20 hours to do everything. And what I will also tell all of you out there that are thinking about the incredible amount of time, if you give them 60 days, they wait until day 31 to start, right? And then they're scrambling to try to get everything done before we tell them, sorry, you're out of time on this. So you could probably squish it into a much shorter period of time. But we know that real life intervenes and there are emergencies in the plant that have to be dealt with. So we build that flexibility in. But we found, because we started, I think, at 90 days, and we were seeing the same problem, and it limited our ability to get more people through the program. So we shortened it down to 60 and said, at day 61, you're done unless you and your mentor have made other arrangements. But it's been a real test of time management skills. So that wasn't one of our primary objectives, but it's become one of the things that has come out of this is they're learning to manage their time a little bit better in terms of the program as well.
And in the mentor side of things, let's say somebody at P&G is listening and they wanted to become a member or a mentor. How does that work? Do you just call them up and you're like, hey, you're a mentor now? And they're like, I am. And you're like, yep, hey, welcome. Here's your badge. No,
Great question.
yeah,
We started with the corporate assessment team. So there are subject matter experts in this field, and they pretty crazily know everything about everything in this space. And
yeah.
so we started with them. But even to call them mentors, we made them go through the whole program. So, we didn't have to worry so much about could they write a good observation? That's their job. They have to be able to do that. We then talked to them through this is what we're expecting our participants to do. So we want you to know every step of the way what they're feeling as they go through this process. So we started with our assessment team. Um, I see Sonia put voluntold. We didn't voluntold these
Volatile.
people. They were actually interested. They helped with some of our
Yeah.
beta testing and that type of thing. And we just started with like a dozen people in that team. And then when we did the first group, it was like, okay, you're the first group. They were handpicked and we were invited. And so they were also seen as some of the more highly capable people in the space. And so once we got them through the program and declared them qualified, we went back to a few of them and said, hey, you did a great job with this as a participant. How would you feel about being a mentor for the program? So we kind of built it that way, kind of that do one, what is it? Learn one, do one, teach one. That's kind of the model that we've taken with that.
Yep.
And so we started with a dozen mentors when the program first started in 2017. And we have, I think, about 30 now. So, we've had some attrition. People move on to other jobs and they don't have time to support the program anymore. But it's kind of been word of mouth now. And if someone contacts us and say they'd like to become a mentor, we make them successfully complete the program as a participant first, and then we pair them with an existing mentor to kind of learn the mentoring side of the business. So it takes a couple of cycles to get them there, which also helps us understand just how committed are they to becoming qualified.
And do you find what kind of reaction have you gotten for this compared to the prior? Obviously, there was a shutdown of the prior, but tell us a little bit about the feedback and the what have you gotten as far as feedback from people, and what have you seen as far as the result?
Yeah, and I think it's something that, Andrew and I have talked offline because the process that this is reflecting is an annual process. We haven't really gotten a ton of metrics to measure, have we moved the needle? Do we see that these assessments in the sites are actually better, more improved? Either the observations are better written than the like. I think we're getting there. Probably in another year, we'll have better data. But
Yep.
as we look at some of the lower level metrics, this is going to increase my capability in QA, or I think some of the other questions we asked, or, you know, I'm going to have more credibility as a qualified leader of this program. It's enhanced my understanding of the principles. On a weighted scale of 1 to 5, the weighted average is always like 4.6 or 4.7 from our participant.
Yay!
Yeah,
I'm
so
just
we're
putting this
hitting the
out
mark.
there. If we were an Uber driver, we'd be one of the top rated ones. So putting that out there.
We do ask a net promoter score question on our surveys, and I would say we
Yeah.
get like 7s and 8s on that one as well. People that are more experienced in the discipline of quality assurance at P&G felt like it was an unnecessary exercise for them to do this program. And in their case, I would agree. So, when they answer the net promoter score question, they rate us a bit lower, but it's because they already feel like, look, I've been there and done that. I really didn't need to do
Yeah.
this program. Where newer people in the discipline are like, this was an incredible experience. And now, not only did you give me a mentor, but I have someone that if I have a technical question, I know I can go ask them and they're going to be able to help me later. So the mentoring thing kind of goes on well after the program has been completed. So I think in those metrics, we get pretty positive results. Our mentoring, as I mentioned before, is seen as the most valuable part of the program. And our mentors put an incredible amount of time and effort into this. And, they have other jobs as well. So this is kind of extra credit for them. And we definitely couldn't do it without them. We've got a good group of people kind of supporting this program, and they get good ones as well. And I think, a lot of times with compliance training, it's a push. This is mandatory.
Yeah.
Go do this today. You've got until Friday, whatever the case may be. And I think that, in the case of this one, it's definitely been a pull. Hey, I want my people qualified through the program. And that's been an incredible help too, as well.
I see this quite often where you have a culture of openness and collaboration where you have a siloed. And fascinating about Procter and Gamble, you guys have broken through your silos. You interact quite often, and fantastic work for that. Susan, I apologize. We actually have gotten to the top of the hour, and apparently we could keep going because both you and I are very passionate about this, and it's been an excellent project. What I wanted to know is what was it like working with Designing Digitally?
Well, we'll just put it out there. You know how it was. Andrew's got an incredible team there. I will say his instructional designer took the big hot mess of a case study that we developed, and she made it what the simulation wound up being. So I think that the team is quite excellent. They're real clear on what we can do versus what we can't do. So I think that's real helpful too, especially when you don't have the capability in this space. But it was a great experience all the way around.
Oh, Susan, thank you. And I promise you all, she is not being bribed in any way for that.
I see
Stop.
Luis mentions we can do a part 2. I'm happy to do that.
Yay!
I would
That would be
also
great.
say I think I'm part of the Slack community as well. So if you have questions and want to hit me up there about my part of it, not the technical development, that's definitely Andrew questions. But if you want to know about my part of it, please feel free to let me know.
Is there any travel or anything, any conferences that you're going to here soon?
We just did Core 4 in Indy last week.
Yeah.
That's it until after the first of the year.
Very cool. Well, hey, thank you so much, Susan. And if anyone is going to, I will be at the Adobe eLearning Conference, and I'll also be at DevLearn. So hopefully, if you're around, come stop by, and we'll nerd it up. And Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. And until we talk again, stay creative.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
You too. Take care. Thank you.